Welcome to the Automate and Grow podcast.
All right, welcome to another episode of Automate and Grow. Today I am joined by Shawn Bouchard, and Shawn was nominated by a prior guest, which is Greg Narain from Before Alpha. And Shawn and I have been chatting just before we started recording, and Shawn's got an interesting background in startup space, and particularly around a Canadian startup on the West Coast that is now a pretty established company in the social media marketing space called Hootsuite. So hoping that we can talk a little bit with Shawn today about his experience there, and then today his work with startups around really automating the customer journey and processes associated with that. So Shawn, thank you. I really appreciate your joining us on this episode. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too. My pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
So you're today working in basically almost like an innovation agency, it sounds like, and it's called CapacityFlux. What do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're doing there and your work? And
Sure. So CapacityFlux is really, first of all, it's kind of a play on the Back to the Future theme with
I
the
was
flux
wondering.
capacitor. Yeah. There's, hopefully, working with me is like traveling through time. You deal with, you can get from A to B much quicker than if you kind of fight your way through it. So that's the play on the theme there. One of the biggest challenges for startups, I think, is establishing not only their vision and where they want to go and figuring out how they're going to get there, but also working to build capacity to achieve that. And capacity can be many things. It can be capital, it can be staff, it can be expertise, it can be that experience that you strive for. You may have experience in one area, but when you're working in a new area for a different kind of startup or a different kind of business, that you're drawing on your own experiences, but you also look to lean on your partners, your co-founders, the early hires. And so I work with startups to accelerate the time it takes them to get from that early stage startup to hopefully a more established company as they're looking to land their Series A. That's kind of my sweet spot. I think there's an opportunity to help companies really, perhaps it's a mix of direct consulting or advising, connecting to suppliers, helping them source talent, but also, building that strategy and the systems and process that they're going to require to kind of grow quickly and establish their business.
Got it. And so you mentioned, it sounds like you're dealing with them kind of after an angel round, or it's self-funded at the point where they're maybe going to raise another round. And that's where they kind of probably, it sounds like almost mature the business so it's repeatable, is what it sounds
Exactly.
like.
Yeah, big focus on repeatability and scalability. So, are the systems and process that we have in place going to enable us to get to that next level in growth, in terms of growth that we want to be as a company? Do we have from a software perspective, do we need to invest in software? Probably. What kind of software? What are we going to get out of it? What kind of decisions are we going to make today that will potentially impact us down the road? And are those the right decisions we need to, or are those the kind of decisions we need to make today, or can we delay some of that and look at, more importantly, what's the underlying strategy driving where we want to go, and then that'll help us maybe make some decisions around the software we purchase and use.
Got it. So when a startup brings you on and you're working with them, are they typically at a point where they have a product, or they're looking to develop a product? Like what stage are they at usually when you get involved?
Yeah, so I'm definitely I think where I can add the most value is when there is already a product. I think there are a lot of experts. I mean, you mentioned Greg is
Greg's brilliant at that, right?
Brilliant at that, at helping innovate and really hone in on what is this product? How who's your customer? How does it address their requirements? I hopefully can come in at a later stage when those sort of more painful points can have been worked through, and establish a plan to start to really demonstrate sales, how we're going to, what's our customer interaction look like, what's our customer support success requirements look like, what are the systems required, et cetera. So it's a little bit later stage.
Got it.
I also work with established businesses that already have a product, and maybe they're looking to reposition in the market, or they've got new management coming in, and they've gone through a rebranding process, and so now they want to look at, how do we be more effective? How do we get growth, all that kind of thing. So.
Because I think one of the themes that we've talked about in various conversations on the podcast so far is really that how what your customer is buying today in 10 years is probably not what they're going to be buying to solve their problem. And actually, their problem might even be different, right? And I think there's been a lot of, I guess, disruption over the last 10 years, but I think what's coming in the next 10 years, just because there's so many new technologies that are at a tipping point, that I think that's going to double or triple from what we just saw. So it seems like one of the top things that I always suggest is that for an established business, you can't rest on your laurels. You have to be able to, innovate. So it sounds like you come in at those points where they're kind of going through some of that change.
Exactly. Okay. Exactly. So an example would be, if a client that I'm in discussions with right now, they're an investment firm. They deal with private equity investment. They deal with high net worth individuals. They've had a nice organic growth path to their business, but they've hired someone to come in and ramp up. They have an established, for lack of a better word, sales model. It's not really a sales model, but they service basically demand generated by their marketing efforts. So they brought in a new VP of marketing that I'm working with to look at how are you promoting the company? How are you connecting with your customers, your clients, and what does that experience look like? And then how does that translate into sales activity? And they're really, this company has gone, like I said, they were a nice organic growth that generated good returns, but they're now looking to really increase their footprint nationally and ultimately internationally. And so what they do in terms of both marketing and sales and servicing their customers is going to change, and they need it to change. They want it to change. They want to grow big and they want to get bigger. So,
got it. So, and when you go to that situation, are they struggling with technology, or it probably changes from client to client? But what are you observing? Like, are you able to add value, and what are they usually looking for help with?
Yeah, so an example there is not so much that they struggle with technology, but technology, quite frankly, has been not really a key area of focus for them because they've been relationship based. Their website is still kind of a revolutionary concept. I mean, I'm speaking a little tongue in cheek, but
crazy though, right?
It is crazy.
We're so
right?
far in, and I think there's a lot of businesses that are even just challenged by what to do with their website, right?
Exactly, and this whole conversation I'm having with them started because, speaking with their VP of marketing, he was lamenting the fact that, they have leads coming in for people that want to do investment with this company, but they don't know. They're either sitting in an inbox somewhere. They don't get back. Oh my God!
Wow.
And you're like, oh no, wait, stop.
Wow, that's crazy. I mean, it's a great problem to have, right?
It's a great problem to have, and
but it's not. You could lose so much stuff that way. There's no process to follow up, and
massive opportunity for loss.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So, and there's a circumstance. So, what your experience is? Let's say they're already generating leads by some method. You're looking to put in a process to make sure that there's a consistent approach to leads and then a handoff to sales, it sounds like?
Yeah, exactly. Right now, there's kind of a more junior person in the organization that gets back to these people, and then they get passed on again to someone, and so may end up being a 72 hour to
wow.
10-day kind of delay before they actually talk to someone who can help them invest money. Yeah, it's totally crazy. Especially when you read studies that say if you're not getting back to people within the hour, probability of reconnecting with them is very low.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, yeah, that's really interesting.
So we're focused on automating that process and taking away the manual opportunity for error and failure, and simplifying that and creating some really simple business rules that'll help address, it's a major problem, but it's a minor problem to fix.
So give me an idea of, for example, what sort of what do you put in first? Do you put the process in place, or is the technology before the process? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it depends on where the client's at. I mean, if you're dealing with an established business, they likely already have some technology in place, and in this case, they're using Salesforce and Pardot. So
there you go.
Yeah, so
my sweet spot.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly.
If you need help,
I will draw on you.
Please.
So we're going to take a look at that. So in that case, it's really about, well, you've got the technology, but you're not using the technology. So why are you not using the technology? So let's start there. Can we start to hone in on that and come up with a strategy that's going to make it the use of their technology?
Where they've got a Ferrari. right? Like they have probably not a cheap product necessarily, but it can do whatever you tell it, but it doesn't sound like they have a plan to implement it properly. And that's kind of where you come in, where you're saying, well, this is how this should be set up, and this is the standards that we want to automate. So that's really interesting. It's like,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
a lot of the work that I would do with a Salesforce client, for example, too, right? Like,
Exactly.
Because it's almost like, okay, well, I got this, literally a Ferrari, but it's got to be tuned.
Exactly. It's got to be tuned, and it's really kind of just sitting in the garage and getting dusty. It's not really.
Oh my God, that's so crazy.
Yeah. So, but for a startup, right, they may not have, they could be tracking leads in a spreadsheet still.
Oh my God, you have no idea. Or you probably have an idea. It blows my mind that how many people are doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a little frightening because people seem okay with it, and
Until they aren't. They're
yeah,
like,
exactly.
We know this sucks, but it's easy, but it's not easy.
Yeah, and the idea that you would sort of leave your business to hang on a spreadsheet that someone could lose or get accidentally delete, or it makes me crazy. But it would keep me up at night.
That's
if I was
so crazy. So yeah. I think one of the themes is always like, how do you take paper processes and digitize them? I think anything that's in spreadsheets, to your point, sounds like you have your thought is it needs to be in a system so I can, do something with the data, action on it, right? Like whether it's workflow or reports, like what's kind of your approach and when you run into that?
Yeah, so a lot of it really starts to I like to break down, in its simplest form, the process. So if you've got a lead that's come in, okay, great. So how did it come in? What kind of marketing do you do? Exactly. So where's your source? What is your source? How are you tracking that? Does that connect to actual marketing activity? So looking at the marketing side of the equation, the inbound side of the equation, and of course combining that with outbound activity, and then looking at, broadly speaking, the organization and its approach to managing sales. I mean, every sales organization is just a little bit different. I mean, it's loosely based around the same idea that you want to sell something, but how you sell it and what you're selling is often, that can create certain or add nuances to that sales process and sales funnel. So understanding fundamentally what are the basic steps that you move a lead through as it works its way through your pipeline, and what are the different parts of the company it touches. So defining that, and that's often just a series of sitting down with a customer and working through a bit of a questionnaire or an interview process. No, probably not very different from what we're doing today.
Yeah, maybe that makes sense. I think I go through something similar, so I can totally relate. Obviously, I want to come up with I want to, obviously, for anyone that watches, to have key learnings, right? So it's like, it sounds to me like you go through a process where, to your point, you're defining that journey. Yeah. So, and then the handoff between two things, which is, how am I attracting these people, where are they coming from? So then you know what you're spending time and money on. That's kind of what you talked about. And then when it does get into the point where it's qualified, do you find that, getting it through the steps of the sales process, which kind of is probably helping them to get to the point where they make a decision, right? Got it. Okay. And then the systems become easy, right? And then it's like, now I know what to do with the system.
Yeah, and then you look to how you translate that exactly into software and into the process that is built into the software. You mentioned something really interesting there, and I think I just want to pick up on that quickly because qualification is, I really focus a lot of time. So once we've done that initial session, I go back and I look at discovery and I look at qualification, and I think there's a huge opportunity to help, particularly startups, be much more effective in how they go to market. And I really hone in and drill down on that area, because I think it's, when you're dealing with a startup, I mean, your burn rates are what they are, and getting revenue and cash is king. You need revenue, you need to get customers in the door, you need to start figuring out what your customers want. The more you can do to understand your ideal customer, so having a sense of who that customer is, and then build that into your sales process so that you're actually looking to identify that type of customer in your conversations is critical, because that means if you do it effectively and you have a good discovery process and a good qualification process, you're going to waste less time on customers that will not be ideal customers. which means you're going to be more effective and hopefully generate a higher close rate on your pipeline. And that's what we're trying to get to. So again, honing in on those systems and processes is really key.
So when you're building that model, how are you defining the ideal customer? Is there?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it, it's interesting in the startup environment because you're dealing with companies that are everything's in flux. You're trying to figure it out. It's an experiment.
Funded experiment.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
exactly. And
Makes
you may
sense.
not know. You may have an idea who your ideal customer is, but you may not have totally figured it out yet because you haven't had enough conversations. You need to have a lot of conversations.
That's
So
funny.
looking through those conversations, actually talking to customers and saying, okay, well, what is it you're looking for? What's your problem? What solutions have you looked at? Hey, you've come to us for a reason. So what is it about our product that interests you? How can we make it better? Having those types of conversations sometimes feels a bit weird for a startup.
They're high risk conversations too.
They are.
I think, right? It's like in people's mind.
Yeah, I don't want to.
Like, I have to do something because of the outcome, because I might not hear what I want to hear.
Exactly.
That's funny, because I think there's that resistance. And we talked a little bit about like how there's resistance to change at different points.
Oh, massive. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that, I kind of write about that theme early in my book, which is don't be afraid of change. And particularly around technology, like there's a chapter called Dancing with Robots, right? So it's like, how do you, this is your tool. This is not trying to take your, livelihood away. This is like, how do we make this help us work better?
Exactly.
Yeah. But even that, with customers, like you could be afraid of customers, right? It's like, hey, I spent all this time and money to get them. I'm almost afraid to ask you what your experience was.
Totally. Yeah. And yet that is, talking about crossing a chasm, like a chasm of fear, like that is, a lot of companies deal with that fear, and they want to make sure that they're getting the most out of their customer conversations, but often sometimes asking that question, that sort of, I'm not sure how this is going to go, leads to the best result because it breaks down that idea that you have to be selling all the time. I'm sure you know this, but it's always a good reminder to talk to people about this, that you don't actually have to sell. You have to listen. You have to talk to your customers and hear what they have to say, and they will tell you what you want to hear.
So it's really interesting to have that conversation with you. Maybe I'm a little older maybe than some startup founders. They can get quite young, or they can be older, but I find that there's this fascination with the tool. And particularly, there's been so much growth in marketing automation and inbound, to your point, that I almost, I had a conversation with a young founder like about a week ago, and it was, hey, I'm generating leads, I'm getting 40% open, how do I automate the sales? But then I think there was like a drop off the cliff because they're looking for another magic bullet where they don't have to talk to the customer. And I don't know if you see that, but I run into this a lot where it's like, wow, this is a floodgate. This is great, but I don't, how do I automate the rest of it?
Yeah.
Sometimes you've got to figure out, like, can you? And I kind of,
Yeah, exactly. And there's, depending on the product, depending on what it is you're selling, it may lend itself to a more automated process. But often, if you're a startup and you're trying to build traction with a new customer, the flashiest marketing, is going to work to get them in the door maybe, but to actually get them over the line, you actually probably do need to have a conversation or two to understand why they're talking to you and what they're looking for. I see that sometimes where there's it's not necessarily a fear of actually talking to customers, but it's almost more of a, like you say, like, how do I automate this, or how do I just convert?
Because they want to scale sales as much as marketing, right?
Exactly.
And I think there's this pressure now almost to, have it so it's an e-commerce sale, have it so it's on a credit card.
That's where I was going, exactly.
It's almost the consumerization of the enterprise, which is the ideal probably for the startup, because then the cost of selling is less, right?
Yeah. But that's the problem, is that there are unrealistic, I guess, so sort of the corollary to that, or another problem that comes from that way of thinking, is that there's a lack of understanding about the benefit of investing in sales staff and sales experience. Um, I see
They're
it all the
expensive and
time.
risky.
Exactly, and you see
And they're always
someone
coming
with a
back trying to
budget that's
sell
pretty,
something you don't have. And I think that's the fear of an
well,
engineer or
that's
the fear of
yeah,
a product manager or a marketing manager, right? And they're like,
yeah,
no. And I think that's probably part of the culture in the startup space. And obviously not everyone that's watches this is in the startup space, but I think it probably is applicable, right? Which is everyone has blind spots, it sounds like what you're experiencing too. Which
sure.
is like I might be really good at marketing, but I'm not good at sales, or I'm really good at sales, but I'm not good at lead gen, or and then no one's good at support,
Yeah, well, and that's well, yeah. Tell me about that. That's a
right?
whole different problem. Yeah, but that is a challenge when you're again we talked about burn rate earlier, but you okay, do I hire a salesperson and pay them what amounts to way more money than I'm making as the founder or CEO with
Right.
the idea that they're going to deliver results? Well,
Right.
you
It's a tough mindset, I think,
yeah,
and even that founder was like, I specifically said, I asked him like, what's your sales process? I'm guessing it's 6 to 12 months. He goes, yeah, about 6 to 10. I'm like, salespeople, you don't have it. Like, you can nurture all you want, but you need to be in front of them to shorten that, or
yeah.
at least understand what's going on. You don't know why they're not buying. I probably can guess,
Hmm. Hmm.
But to that point, and he had a half-time sales, like a part-time salesperson.
Yeah,
One.
and exactly, and when I think this is where it gets interesting when you're dealing with a company that's been through an accelerator and they've come out and they're looking to grow.
Oh,
When you actually do the breakdown on their revenue targets and what that actually translates into in terms of sales force required based on reasonable quotas and management, ratios in terms of management to staff, their eyes go like really big and go, that's a
yeah.
lot of money. Well, yeah,
That's
but
people are expensive in a sense, and then even like getting an actual sales process, training, you know, managing those people, that's a thing, right? It's almost like a professional service internally, right? So
it
I
100%
think I
is.
can see where it's very intimidating, where people are almost trying to not have a complex product or sell to a complex customer, and
Yeah.
I think that's your scale, right? It's like if you have a complex customer but you have a simple product, you probably still need you can hybrid it, right?
Yeah.
Or if it's complex and complex, it's all like, you can automate processes for the sales, but you need the sales guys, right? So
You need the sales guys, and
yeah,
you need something that is repeatable and scalable, right? And again, if you're relying on software to do that for you to create that scalability, sure, it can. I mean, that's what software is great at doing.
sure.
But from a actual customer perspective, your business may not work that way, and it might take you a few cycles to figure that out.
So I don't want to spend too much time on this because I know we have so many other things we can talk about.
Yeah,
But
sure.
would you say that the death of sales is greatly exaggerated?
I would. I definitely would.
I,
I think similarly to marketing, though, I think it's changing. It's
right.
it's definitely there's a huge. I on my blog I talk to a lot of salespeople about how their job has changed, and it's really interesting to see. Talking to people who've been through, either old dogs who've been through the wars a long
Yeah.
time ago, and they're transitioning into a new model, or people who have even worked in sales for, say, 5-10 years, and they've seen now a new way to how they're having to deal with customers or deal with leads. So I think it's definitely changing. So we hear a lot about sales automation.
Right.
I still think when you drill down on what that actually is, a lot of it comes down to really supporting people. It's giving them better tools. It's giving better resources to be more effective, in their one-on-ones with customers. So I'm a big believer in sales enablement. I think that actually breaks down a lot of the historic challenges between sales and marketing, and it looks at, well, what is the organization doing to engage customers, convert them, engage prospects and convert them to customers, and really, I think that's an interesting area to be right now and to focus on.
And on that point, which is interesting, I think part of the positive changes are, and depends on who you are. I mean, it's nice to be an AE and an outside type person in that type of role. I think that's kind of shrunk a little bit because the expense and the size that you need to be able to, or the investment you need to be able to make in those people in that process. But
Yeah.
it seems like the internal salespeople, that seems to have grown quite a bit. I haven't been in a corporate environment in a while, so I'm like,
Yeah.
But that's my observation. I don't know if you're seeing the same thing.
Oh yeah. I mean, if you're talking, just so I'm clear, are we talking about the difference between inside versus outside sales or field sales?
Yeah, or
Yeah,
even what
yeah.
would traditionally be an outside type role, like an AE role, like are you seeing that still being inside, where they're using tools and technology to, well, like for this, for example, we're on a call that's live and we can have a real conversation.
Yep.
I don't have to necessarily always go to see you, drive, park, have an expense
Yeah.
account. Those things are important sometimes, but I
They
think there's
are.
a
Yeah.
greater acceptance of this type of tool and probably other tools that help. Even calendars and booking is one example. It seems such a simple thing, but
Yeah.
you waste so much painful time on that. And then,
Oh, trying to set a meeting, especially if there's more than two people involved. I mean, man, it's huge. To answer your question though, I do think we are seeing more roles focused inside, and for good reason. I mean, cost is one thing, but also I think just the idea that there are efficiencies that are created by teams that work together that deal with the similar challenges. They can have one-on-ones, they can have team meetings and work through some of the challenges that they're experiencing. There's huge benefit to that, not only for the company, but also for the customer. Because if I'm having an issue that you're also having, and our account executives or account managers are talking to each other about those general challenges, then there's solutions that are going to be much more quick to deliver, because
that makes sense.
the feedback's going to get back to the company much more quickly. I also think there's an interesting shift to, like for Hootsuite, for instance, at Hootsuite, we had our account executives, account management team. So once a client had come on board and they'd been, onboarded, there was a customer success team that worked with our account managers to really ensure that our customers were getting the most out of the product, whether that was ongoing training, looking at new opportunities with, new services and products that we were coming out with to add value to what they were already doing. Or, when the team I was on, just towards the last year and a bit that I was with Hootsuite was the partnership team, and we were building integrations so that we could say, if you're an IBM customer, an Oracle customer, SAP,
I see what you're saying.
we could work with those platforms and bring that kind of functionality into Hootsuite to make it more effective. Microsoft is a great example. We worked long and hard with Microsoft to build some really interesting integrations. Those are the kind of things that a customer success team can then take advantage of, and it's you could kind of look at that and say, oh yeah, well, they're just trying to sell the customer more and more and more. Well, actually, often it was value add. It was about you've already made,
because they have a vested interest. So just for people that don't know, Hootsuite is a product or a company that focuses on what?
It's a social media marketing platform, or social marketing platform. If you think about your interactions with companies today, a lot of it is happening on social media. If you're complaining about an airline, if you're
I've done that.
Yeah,
they respond.
Sure. I think they do. My luggage is not here 3 hours later. Okay, what are we going to do about this? Yeah. And often it's interesting because you can get much better customer service more quickly through social media than you can trying to on a phone. So Hootsuite really enables that kind of interaction to take place. It has both a free, a pro, and an enterprise component. So in terms of the spectrum of customer interaction, the company does a really good job of addressing each of those different kind of cohorts.
Got it.
On the enterprise side, there's a bunch of team functionality that enables you to really manage your customer experience, taking advantage of, like I said, those integrations so that you can customer histories, their interaction with your actual company and your core software is
interesting.
Yeah,
because I know like a lot of those capabilities, like on the Salesforce platform, for example, they have the Service Cloud.
Yes.
And so they'll manage multiple channels, social being one of them. But it sounds like I didn't realize Hootsuite. I always know Hootsuite originally from, hey, I want to manage my publishing on multiple social profiles.
Yep.
So if anyone's out there and I don't have any interest in Hootsuite as far as like there's no vested interest. I'm just talking about what it is. But it's an interesting tool. Yeah, you're not there. Yeah. It's a tool that basically a small business could use, for example, to manage their social interactions, or a marketing manager could. But it sounds like it's more than that, where you can actually use it for customer support and success.
Definitely. And I mean, you mentioned Salesforce. I mean, that was one of our key integrations. Even though they're a competitor, we actually had a integration with Salesforce that enabled you to manage your customer
That makes
customer
sense.
and Salesforce. Yeah, I mean, and I think that was an interesting example of how, even though it's a competitive space and Salesforce has its own platform there, there's room for everyone, and I think it acknowledges that there's been a key shift, and when it comes to sales and marketing, there's so many more options today than there ever were, and that's the biggest takeaway when you talk to salespeople today is that sales is actually really exciting because there's so many very amazing solutions that you can bring in that address a very specific requirement and need. That if you're relying on a more of a stack solution, which is your traditional software model,
It's like, here's my box.
Yeah, it does everything.
Here's my speeds and feeds. Whereas that's interesting. So like enablement is like those partnerships, those integrations are kind of like another thing to talk about that are beneficial and they create a sticky product.
Absolutely.
And I think that concept of success came out of like customer success kind of has evolved out of businesses like that, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it seems to me that the companies that have figured out gotten over the fear of partnerships have a strong customer success teams because they realize that they're not in it to solve all the problems. They're in it to solve specific problems. And the more partners you can bring to the table, you mentioned stickiness. You're a stickier product for your customer, but you're also actually delivering real value that there's a lot of love that comes out of that relationship. Customers love it because they can actually do their job more effectively. And at the end of the day, hopefully that's what we're all there to do is make our customers more effective. So, yeah.
And then I know you were talking about the onboarding process, and it sounded. I think the one point we were starting to make, and maybe veered off, was that the software as a service businesses that are like kind of a utility model have a vested interest in keeping the customer.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, your cost of customer acquisition it's a lot easier to keep a customer or add to that customer than to try and find a new one, right? So it's it's a big deal.
So what sort of approach, or at what point are you finding those businesses are recognizing that, and are they embracing the concept of customer success, or is it kind of like, we got to do this now? Or
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to the culture of the company, and I think if you're in a startup, you have a wonderful advantage to really establish the kind of culture that you want to have and that you want to build on. I think where you run into that challenge more is on an established company or a company that's maybe evolved out of another company. It's a spin-off or something where some of those sort of old, this is the way we've always done it, processes kind of continue. Yeah, and you hear that all the time, right? Yep. And that's often where you run into the greatest challenge there. And so the idea of customer success and regular conversations with your customers, and you establish that cadence, and you can it's a fine line between providing value and being an annoyance, right? So you have to figure that out. But I think the return on that is huge, and I think companies are starting to see that return and the the value of investing in that. I think in a startup environment, obviously those are things that are starting to maybe come online a little later in the evolution of the business when you have more revenue to support that, because it can be an expensive model because it requires people. You can't totally rely on technology.
Right.
But I do think startups are already very good at wearing many hats, and so you see that kind of model maybe just evolve naturally because your salesperson is kind of they're doing sales, they're doing account management, and they're really looking out for the benefit of their customer if they're in it for the right reasons. So they're already kind of doing that, and then as the company evolves, those roles can be a little bit more structured and streamlined into actual job titles. And so there's a process that I think you can evolve to, which is good.
So I want to be conscious of your time. I'll ask you a couple kind of questions to wrap up. If I'm let's say I'm an established business, or even a startup, but let's say I'm an established business, what, in your opinion, are the 2 or 3 systems, and let's think about software, that I need to think about adding to support all of this?
Well, I think at minimum some kind of CRM contact system is key. Whether that's for just strictly knowing who your customers are and having that institutional memory, or if it's, more broadly speaking, you're tracking, all of your customer interactions there. I think marketing automation is another tool that's pretty critical today. When you look at the sales process and break that down, again, thinking about our ideal customer and where they are in the customer journey, there's going to be different contacts and types of contact messages that you're going to put out to the customer, and marketing automation really helps a lot with that. And I guess that kind of blurs a little bit into sales automation in the sense that those tools can maybe be both the same tool, and it's just how you build your campaigns and how they're structured.
Makes sense. So like nurturing versus
exactly
outreach versus sales cadence, or even support cadence. Is that kind of
support cadence? Yeah. And then the third I think critical piece is support. I think understanding what are the challenges. If you try and do that all in one system, I think it can be challenging. I think it can work, but you need a really, really good setup of that system and someone who's actually working it. So a sales operations person, someone who's really on top of it. So I think typically what happens is you see that several different platforms that work together to deliver that kind of customer data that becomes useful for the organization, for the company. So whether it's ticketing or whether it's some kind of task management system that you can use to break those down and
makes sense.
Start to see the trends. I think those are three pretty critical platforms. Yeah.
Okay, so if someone wants to work with you, and how do they contact you? What's the best channel to get a hold of you? And then I'm going to ask you two questions to wrap up.
Sure. Well, my website, CapacityFlux.com. So that's probably the best way to find me, learn a bit more about services I offer. But I'm a big believer in LinkedIn too. I think I love LinkedIn. I think it's one of the sort of unsung. People who get it, but I still run into people. It's really funny that they get a little uncomfortable if you send them a LinkedIn request if they don't know you.
Yeah, and I think LinkedIn creates that culture, right?
I think a bit, yeah.
with their UI, right?
Yeah.
It's like don't invite this person.
Yeah,
you're a 3 to them.
Yeah,
not a
exactly.
2. All right, so I've been asking everyone these two things. The first thing is, what are you doing, whether it's personal or professionally, to change the world?
Wow, that's a good question. I think the answer to that is maybe two-part. I think I'm reading a book right now that it's called The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F.
I've seen this. I have not read it.
Yeah,
it's got the orange cover.
Yeah, orange cover. Yeah. You can read it because it doesn't use the word that we all know, but so you can feel comfortable reading on the subway.
Just another word.
Just a word, exactly. But it talks a lot about understanding your core values, your fundamental core values that are important to you, and not really worrying about a lot of the stuff that we get caught up in, and ultimately with the goal of becoming more, I guess, true in your relationships with people. And that's something I've always believed in. It's how I approach my sales career. It's how I work with my customers. I think there's an authenticity that naturally comes from that, and you build trust, and it's something that hopefully will continue throughout your interaction with that person, whether they're a customer today or 20 years from now.
I feel like it's a sneaky title. That's not like what I would have expected out of that book.
I know. Yeah.
I think it would attract people that are like, oh, this is not what I wanted at all. Well, that's so funny.
It is. I don't want to say it's a bait and switch, but I think it's very clear when you start reading the book that this is less about telling you how to do it and really giving you a framework to try and discover how to do it on your own,
okay.
Which I think is important. So whether or not that makes the world a better place, I guess it depends on how how much you value truth and authenticity. I value that greatly. So to me, I think if we all started to do that a little bit more, we'd maybe get to a better place where we could actually have conversations with people, because that's a big concern today. I think that there's so much tension and friction. I mean, you can reduce it to politics, but even beyond that, I think there is a fear to sometimes consider an alternative point of view to something that, sitting back and saying, well, what if I'm not right about this? It is a really valuable question to ask yourself, and I think that translates to much more than just sales opportunities.
So yeah, that's really interesting. So I think, and this is an aside, but to me, commerce and capitalism, the one benefit of it, and sales, like it can get a bad rap, but it's a conversation. And I think that if you look at, my, what I always learned was you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and you should use it in the same ratio, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I haven't heard that. I like that. That's good.
And I think it's like, to your point, like that's, consider the other side first. But that's so it sounds like you're changing the world one conversation at a time by not being a war.
No, it's a long road, but I think it's a worthwhile one to go down. So.
That's great. Well, so the last thing that I'll ask you, and I've been asking all of my interesting and trusted guests, is I want you to nominate someone that you think would be another great guest for Automate and Grow that's either an entrepreneur, like a founder, or an expert in one of the areas that we talked about, whether it's product, marketing, sales support, automation, and growth.
Okay. And you want this now? I'm on the hot seat.
We can always change it later, but it's usually the first idea is the best idea.
Yeah. There's somebody I think that I really enjoyed working with. His name's Steve Johnson. He was a chief revenue officer at Hootsuite.
Okay.
He's now chief operating officer at Vidyard, which is a video marketing platform.
Oh, interesting. I haven't heard of Vidyard, so that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, Vidyard is it's a Canadian company, but Steve's actually
I don't know how I ended up back in Canada.
I don't know.
I escaped, and now like Greg sent me off in
this weird tangent in Great White North.
It's like the mafia pulling me back in, but
exactly. Yeah, you call it the maple syrup mafia, but
you're also behind the maple curtain.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Right, because behind the maple curtain, you don't quite get the same content on Netflix or TV or. Anyways, that's inside joke for people that are watching on.
I like that maple curtain. I'm going to use that. So Steve is actually American, and he lives in Maine, and he travels a lot.
Great.
So he's So I'd nominate Steve. I think he'd have some really interesting things to say because he oversaw both the growth team that managed more of the pro revenue, which was more not automated, but a lot of it directly connected to more of the marketing channels that we were using at the time.
Fantastic.
And the enterprise sales team. So I think he'd be a really interesting guest, and I'm happy to introduce it to you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so Steve Johnson, I'm going to get an introduction, and you've been nominated to appear on another episode of Automate and Grow. So I look forward to that conversation. Shawn, thank you very, very much. I will add a bunch of links and information in the show notes so that people can reach out to you. And this has been, I think this is like the 6th. So this is the 6th episode of Automate and Grow. And I'm really excited that you're able to join me for it.
Thank you. And I look forward to seeing the 60th episode. I think it's going to be great.
I'm going to get to 30 really fast, believe it or not. So I'm a madman. I'm going to do 30 in 30 days. So let's see if I get there.
Good for you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I'll talk to you.
All right. Thanks. Cheers.
Let's see.
This has been an episode of the Automate and Grow podcast. Check out other episodes for interesting topics on how to grow, innovate, and automate your business. Subscribe or like us on iTunes, YouTube, Google Play, or on our website at www.automategrow.biz and get your copy of the book Automate and Grow at Amazon today.